one of the things that I used to say to people I worked with, particularly younger people coming into the industry, news and journalism or newspapers and broadcasters, they've always been selling a product. And one of the things that I absolutely adored about moving to London and the UK in 1995 was the breadth of newspapers. I mean, I was the most excited person on a Saturday morning. And, you know, the newspapers, you used to carry them to your front door, and I mean, your arms would be breaking. And they were relatively cheap then. They didn't cost a lot. And they were just such a huge breadth of wonderful writers and information, but they were definitely packaged with a point of view. Mm-hmm. So, of course, The Guardian had a point of view, and The Telegraph and The Times, and, you know, back in the Sun and the Red Tops, they all had a point of view. But as long as you knew that, I thought, you know, that was the reader was informed about where the information was being slanted. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't mind a packaged product in news. I just like to know what is behind the thinking of the editors. And in those days as well, the editors, you know, they were sort of rock stars, weren't they? And
absolutely, yeah.
Because they and the major writers, because they were the gatekeepers to this huge audience. And of course now we don't have the same gatekeepers, which is great. I think that's really healthy.
I think they're also the gatekeepers to the world as well, because they gave the people that read the things that they wrote a perspective of the world, and that's the only way back then that you really could have seen the world. Yes,
exactly. And you know, are we better off having thousands, tens of thousands of people giving their perspective? I'm talking about podcasts, really, not social media, but podcasts, or a couple of hundred or thousands, you know, smaller numbers back in the day. But it's, you know, the trade-off, I think, is in quality and understanding where people are coming from. And but I think people are more sophisticated than we think. You know, I was thinking about it as I was coming here. And, you know, when social media first started, I can remember Twitter and Facebook, and in our office it was just amazing. I mean, oh my God, you're meeting all of these people that you haven't seen for ages. I mean, remember that flurry of excitement of discovering someone that you haven't seen for years.
Someone you used to go to school with.
Exactly.
That's what they're doing.
But then also on places like Twitter, where people were having really constructive conversations, and I think we forget that in the early days of social media, it was this wonderful world of people sharing information and tips and restaurant reviews and, you know, food and issues and everything else. It's in recent years that it's taken a darker turn, but there is still that core of sharing information with people and being able to find information from trusted sources and people who are experts. And I think that what has happened over the last 10 years or so, younger people are much more savvy than perhaps us oldies. You know, we're a bit more like, oh my God, it's going to hell in a handcart. But, you know, my son and his mates, they kind of know how, you know, they say, don't worry about it. You know, we know that guy's a, you know, Wally or whatever. I was about to say something else. I forgot I was on a podcast.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I think we're, you know, people will become more sophisticated and know how to weed stuff out.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you think then, from a podcast point of view, makes a good podcast for you? I'm open.
Let's share.
I'm listening.
So I think it's honesty, it's people who are knowledgeable, and I really want to listen to people who know what they're talking about. And I don't just mean academically, I mean through their lived experience. You know, that's the cool thing to say, your lived experience. But and a conversation. And it's really interesting because I've with the London Society, Dave Hill and I have started a podcast, and I don't think we're as good as you.
Oh.
We're doing it online. I think we're a little bit stilted, and I think it's being relaxed and confident about your subject matter and being knowledgeable. I think that's the most important thing. I also really don't like sort of forced banter. I'm not really interested in people who've known each other for years who sort of constantly do that. Remember when I went to Oxford, and I went to all of that sort of. It makes me feel closed off from the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. You almost feel like an outsider. I think a good podcast for me is I feel part of the conversation. I can access it. As opposed to there's these, you've mentioned forced banter, maybe I would phrase it as inside jokes. It's like, just goes straight over my head. It's like, I don't know if I can access that one, but one of the things with the podcast though is I think, and this point here isn't to get political, but I think that the point I'm going to make is around politics and shows the strength of podcasts, is I do actually think that the reason, or one of the key reasons why Donald Trump is currently the president of the US is because of his approach to podcasts. And if I understand the story correctly, that came to him via his son that was of that younger generation that understands the influence that podcasts can have as opposed to other more traditional forms of media. And I think the podcast that did the best for him was the one that he had with Joe Rogan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're aware of that one or you saw that one, but he spoke with him for a considerable period of time. It was an unscripted conversation where his main opponent at that time, Kamala Harris, had a scripted conversation, and I've forgotten the name of the podcast host that she had. The point wasn't to do with the host, though, it was to do with the scripted versus the unscripted. And that's where I think that authenticity element and that I can access that, I think makes all the difference.
I think you're spot on with that, because in my career as well, it's been really interesting, because when I started out in the world of PR and comms, I think that chief executives and politicians were reasonably unscripted, and some of the references I have may be unknown to people in the UK, but in Australia you had some really great characters in politics who, if you go through the archive, said some really unscripted things and were sort of entertaining, but would, as time went on, that started to become more problematic. And I think then what happened is the birth of people like me and PR people and media training and everything else started to make everything scripted. And if you're a media junkie like I am, you can always hear someone who's been media trained versus someone who hasn't. And I think the media training side of things got to the point where it took all the value out of what anyone is saying. And I'll use a good example. The Today program has been my go-to listen for 30 years. I think the format is almost broken now, because if you look at, they have that 8:10 slot, that's 10 past 8 in the morning, where I think it's about an 8 or a 10 minute slot with the minister of the day on the issue of the day. And it's kind of pointless for the audience, because you get nothing out of it. You end up with the minister just sticking to the rehearsed line, the journalist just on attack, and actually it's hard on the ears now. Whereas you take the same interviewers and they're on their podcast, much more interesting, sort of much more nourishing for the listener to understand what they're on about. But sorry, back to the Trump thing. Everyone has become so controlled that people like Trump and Farage and these sorts of media entertainers are much better at using the medium of PR. If you look back into the value of PR, right? So back in the day, there was advertising, and advertising is quite simply you take out some space, you book the space, you pay for it, and you put whatever content in you like, and it'll live or die on that content, if it's effective or not. And PR is about influence, actually. It's about getting your message across. And one of the great things about PR was that it was the cheapest form of advertising because you're getting free content. You don't have to pay for it. The downside was that you can't control it. So you do an interview with someone and then it's published in the paper a couple of days later. You don't know how you've come across or how it's going to be reflected. But the people who were really, really smart understood the power of this. And, sort of in our lifetime, you look at someone like Richard Branson, and I know a lot of his stuff now doesn't play for a younger audience, but back in the day, he was a guy who could turn up, he understood the power of a photo shoot, the power of an image, and he would have wall-to-wall coverage, and it cost him very little except for the cost of the PR people and sort of the stunt and all of that sort of stuff. The other person is, Michael O'Leary with Ryanair. Michael O'Leary is probably one of the best PR operators I have ever sort of witnessed. He knows how to do a radio interview, take one interview and make it blow up to give him acres and acres of coverage. And whatever you think of the problems that he puts forward, I can remember he did one about how he was going to charge for toilets or something.
Yeah. And standing up as well, right, on the
and of course, that doesn't happen. But what he does do is get acres of coverage for Ryanair, and everyone knows they're hideously cheap. Now, whether you want to fly with them or not is a whole different thing. But he gets his message. His core message is, we are cheap. And that was very successful. I mean, it's changed slightly in the last couple of years. But these were people who had a great instinct for understanding how to ride the wave and the value that you can get out of PR. I think lots of people now want to ride that wave, but they want to have it in a controlled fashion. And it doesn't work. And I think that's why people like Trump and Farage have been so successful. And I would say to the other parties, you've got to learn how to do that. You've really got to get with the program. I think Ed Davey has tried that, hasn't he? Hasn't completely worked in terms of votes, but still, he's got a lot of coverage.
Yeah, definitely. I think, though, taking this principle into the construction industry, it seems to me that the whole industry is more interested in the sanitized version of a PR as opposed to a let's go and let's have a conversation. I've tried a number of times to have senior members of large blue chip construction organizations come on here, and those people that are really, really senior will come along with a marketing or a PR type of executive to give them some help. And I'm not a journalist, the first thing, but most of them have declined and said, "Oh, that's something that we don't do. We don't do podcasts." And it's the thing that concerns them the most. It's the unscripted nature of this podcast that really gives them, really worries them.
Yes, I think you've just hit on such an important point and such a lost opportunity for the industry. So the industry at large is misunderstood. And everybody who works in construction or the built environment, whether it's development or whatever aspect, all complain that nobody understands, the value that they bring to the economy, which they do. Many good things, which are, these are the people who build everything for us, so they're hugely important. But they're misunderstood because they're not confident enough to have those broader conversations. And I think at a very base level, I think the industry, and I mean the built environment is such a broad industry, so there are lots of different tribes.
Absolutely.
So if you take construction, I think most people in construction know very little about the media and PR and all of this sort of stuff in any case. So they're naturally distrustful of it. And because they don't understand it, they're nervous and it's not their natural state. So generally, in my experience, they outsource it. You know, and you're right. A lot of the people at the top do not want to enter into conversations with normal journalists, let alone unscripted podcasters. And I think that's a great shame because they've got such an amazing story to tell. And most of the people I know who work in the industry are brilliant people. And there have been so many great advances. I mean, I'm incredibly proud of the construction industry in this country. And it's such a shame that they're not more on the front foot and confident so they can express that, because I think they'd win people over very quickly. Now, there's always people who've done things wrong in the construction industry. You know, nothing is 100% perfect. But if you look particularly on the major schemes, you know, the major schemes that are brought forward in our cities, you know, things like health and safety are just exemplary. And if you've ever been on a building site, it's an incredible learning experience for anyone who's a manager. I have this thing about building sites. You know, when you go onto a building site, first of all, your induction is strict. You know exactly where it is, where you've got to behave and step and all of those sorts of things. And you know, if you see a piece of timber on the ground, it's everyone's responsibility to pick it up. So there's a great sense of teamwork on a building site that I've not seen in an office, for example. In an office, if we have, as I say, the equivalent of a piece of timber lying on the floor, i.e. someone who's useless, we all step around it. You know, nobody picks it up and gets onto it straight away. I think construction managers should come in and teach office politics and management. They'd make a lot of money. In any case, I think they do amazing stuff, and it's a shame they're not more confident to come and explain what they're up to, and embrace this sort of discussion and conversation.
Was this a battle or something that you had when you owned your media company? And we'll go on to how you built that up, because I'm interested in discovering that with you as well. But was that one of the constant battles that you had to try and persuade your clients to entertain and to go into this type of conversation?
Yes, definitely. Well, podcasts are relatively new in that regard, and so I think more and more people are doing them. But generally, being relaxed around journalists was something that you had to help people understand. And there were some people who were very good at it, and not everyone was bad, but I think it was lacking the understanding of the opportunity and the nature of PR. As I say, a lot of people go into media relations now thinking it's an area you can control, and it's not. So as long as you understand that and you see the upside, and also being honest. Actually, I'm going to backtrack on that bit of advice. Sometimes being just clearer about what you want to say, rather than because I know there have been disasters when people have been very honest.
So it's more to do with the clarity as opposed to the honesty, is what you're saying?
It's
understand your message that you want to get across.
Yes. What I mean is you don't turn up to a podcast and say I've had a really bad day, and and I've just fallen out with a client.
Yeah.
We don't want that honesty,
Yeah.
but I think being able to get your point across and being more confident is really important.
So you built a business up from scratch
Mm-hmm.
to something that was significant.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're happy disclosing what that was at the end, I'll leave that for you to decide. But I'm interested in what advice you would give to someone that's out there at the moment trying to do the very thing that you had from the ground up with all of the various digital assets and options and things that they have at their disposal. What advice would you give that startup?
I'm not going to start up another business because I don't want to. However, I think about this all the time, and I think that there is a massive opportunity. I mean, if I was 30 years younger, this would be amazing. First of all, with the AI tools that you have to promote your business, it is much, much easier than it used to be. I think for women, it's easier than it was. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it definitely is easier. And the opportunity to promote yourself and get to market, reach your target audience is better than it's ever been. The other thing, and this is going to be a bit more controversial, is for the people who want to really work hard, you know, the world's your oyster. Because I say this to some people I know who've moved over here from Australia. And I think when you move over, when you come from somewhere else and you come to London, it's like, oh my God, everyone's going to be so brilliant and it's so competitive and it's going to be really, really hard. And actually, if you want to work really hard and be smart, you can achieve anything, because there are a lot of people who don't want to do that anymore. So the gap has actually widened in a way that I've not experienced in my lifetime. So if I had my sort of energy and determination that I had back then in this market, I think I could go actually further faster than I did back then. So be confident, but you've got to work hard. You know, there's no, if you want to run a business, there is no work-life balance. It melds all into one thing, and you've got to be prepared to go for that. Otherwise, don't start a business, but don't hedge your bets thinking that you can start a business, have a wonderful lifestyle, and it'd be easy. It'll be hard, but you've got to work hard. But also, I really enjoyed it, so it didn't feel like a great sacrifice. I mean, you know, my stepson and my son all lived with, you know, a working woman who was working all the time. They're okay. I mean, there were times back then I thought, oh my God, I was doing the wrong thing, and, you know, am I failing? And actually, I didn't fail them.
So this is, you talking here of what people refer to as the mum guilt?
Yes, yeah. I think the mum guilt. And I think even now, I mean, there's always someone who's losing out in my life, because you're always doing something and you're dedicating 100% over here. Well, that means something else falls by the wayside. But I'm comfortable with that now. I used to be really stressed about that, but that's just sort of how I'm made. So people are fine. They'll get over it.
That was one piece of advice I was given by a mentor some years ago. The question that was asked to him is, how do you balance family, hobbies, community interests and responsibilities, job, career, learning? How do you balance all these things? And his advice was, you don't balance it. You know, this concept of balance is not right. It's that you, where you are, you give it 100% of your attention. So if you're at home, be at home. If you're on holiday and having fun with your kids, be on holiday and have fun with your kids. If you're at work, be at work. Don't try and be at home and at work. Don't try and do this and do that. The fact of you doing one thing means that everything else is neglected. And that's okay, because you can go to do that other thing at another time. The key thing is to make sure that nothing breaks. It's not to have everything, if you're using a spinning plate analogy, to have the plates all spinning at the same speed. That's not the ideal. The ideal is not to let the plate smash, but you need to spend the time on the right plate that you need to spin at that time, and just do that. Don't try and spin them all at the same time.
Yes, yeah. I think that's really good advice. I wasn't quite like that. So my son always, when he was younger, used to call me Mrs. Not Even Listening, because he'd be telling me something and I'd be nodding, but he could see that, you know, my head was somewhere else because I was thinking about a client or something like that. I think the other thing is embracing the imperfect. As a younger woman, I was much more obsessed about, you know, being perfect in every aspect. And now I'm much more, you know, if you want to be on this journey with me, you're going to have to accept that some things are not going to be as good as others. But you can still, what I mean by that, you know, is, so if you bake a cake, it doesn't have to be bake-off standard. It just needs to be so everyone gets a slice and goes yum, and then off they pop. You don't have to be the very best baker ever, but everyone gets fed. You know, I garden a lot now, and I've got to the point where if something dies, it's died. It'll come back or self-seed somewhere else, and just enjoy the process.
What improvements do you think that the industry can make in order to better tell the sustainability story?
Very interesting question. I think the biggest issues that the industry, the sort of built environment industry has, is its siloed nature. So it's very difficult to be trying to tell one story with so many different sort of groups all going in different directions. But one of the things that I've been involved with is a group called Don't Waste Buildings, and that is a volunteer group. It's non-political, we're not funded, but we recognise, this is Will Hurst, who's the editor of, or managing editor of AJ Magazine, Architects Journal, and Richard Nelson, who was the president of the Institute of Directors Property and Built Environment Group. And what we all realised is that actually most of the industry was saying the same thing on sustainability, but they weren't saying it together. So this lack of joined up lobbying is a terrible word, but that's what it is, means that if you're a minister in government, you have lots and lots of different groups coming through telling their story. But there are so many groups, who do I listen to? And I think the most powerful group is the House Builders Federation, and everybody else has a small piece. And I think coming together more would help sell that story, because you've got one group telling it. I think also showing the size of the industry. So for example, if you look at the Office of National Statistics, construction is one part. You know, if you look at the economic drivers of the country, construction's one side, real estate is a different pot, architecture, I think, is in creative services. So nobody actually values the whole industry as an economic driver. And so I think a bit of work needs to be done on that. And it's not hard work, it's just getting people all together.
So how would that work then? So if I wanted to do that, if I said, Leanne, I really love that idea, I want to do that, how would I even go about doing that? Or are you suggesting that it's a governmental piece of work that needs to be done to bring that group together?
Well, I'm nervous about asking for more governmental work, because I figure they're struggling with what they've got. So I think there's one thing that could be done, is to go to the ONS and ask them to revisit how they categorise the sector. That would be a start. Yeah. But the only way they're going to do that is if all the chairs or heads of all of the different industry groups come together and say, we would like you to do this. Yep. So I think the first thing to do is to get all of those board directors all in one room, lock them in one room and say, right, what do we want to say? Now, there will always be different takes on things. I'm not suggesting that everybody is completely
No.
of one voice on all things. But by and large, we're all heading in the same direction. And I think that's what the thing with Don't Waste Buildings came about, because you have a situation where the government has declared that we have to reach net zero by 2050. That's 25 years away. And that is an act of parliament. So it's not just a wish, it's an act of parliament. Then you say to the government, okay, that's great. The construction industry, construction waste accounts for 66% of all waste in the country. So what's your plan? And there is no plan. And then you go to the different groups, and everybody has what we found is it looks like they've all got different plans, but in fact, most of the industry bodies want the same thing. We need clarity on policy, so it's easy to understand. So if you're a developer and you turn up at a building site or a building, you know exactly what is expected in terms of reuse. And secondly, you need to make it financially viable to reuse a building. So in central London, that's pretty much the case. I'm not saying it's always the case, but because of the land values, it means you can reuse a building and get your money back because there's higher risk. Obviously, you don't know exactly what's going on with the building, so there's higher risk. But outside of London, all over the country, there are so many towns and cities that are blighted by unused or disused buildings that are not being brought into use. And there's no financial incentive to do it. And in fact, there's probably, you may make a loss. So if someone, you run a business, I've run a business, if you're going to make a loss, how often do you do that? Not very often. So we need to change the financial incentive structure. VAT is a very obvious one that everyone talks about, and I know lots of people have tried to have that changed in the past. For buildings outside of the major cities, we have to make it financially viable for you to reuse buildings, because nobody who runs a business can withstand making losses. It's just, it can't happen. So we're doing a case, we do a lot of case study tours around the country. We're going down to Portsmouth in July. And Portsmouth is a really interesting one because it is like a lot of coastal cities, struggling, but has sort of unique older buildings. They've got a lot of fabulous old maritime buildings. But what is the incentive for the developer or the investor to reuse those? And so that's what we're going to do. What we aim to do when we do these tours is speak to the building owners and understand what is stopping them from being able to reuse buildings. And it's not just the environment and net zero. It's about housing. The spending review has just been announced, and this huge amount of money is being invested into social housing, which sounds great. But Historic England have said that there are 600,000 homes that could be provided pretty quickly from existing historic buildings, but someone needs to be given the incentive to make it happen. Or incentive may be the wrong word. Maybe it's take away the disincentive is the key thing.
Yeah, just increase the ability. So I've done a lot of work with a professor from Stanford University called B.J. Fogg, and he talks about, or he's studied for the last 35 years, behaviour, human behaviour, and to design behaviour. And one of the elements of behaviour is ability. So to make something happen, you need to have the ability in order to do that. But ability is broken down into 5 subsections, and they are time, money, mental effort, physical effort, and routine. And so one of the things that I see is a massive issue when it comes to this element that you're talking about with reusing buildings is not so much the money and the time, but it definitely is the mental effort or the hoops that you need to jump through to say, how on earth am I actually going to persuade the powers that be to make this viable? because at the moment I just I don't know how to do it, or I know how to do it, but it's so much, don't even want to go down this road because I'm a business. I'm going to go down this road because this is going to, for the amount of mental effort that I'm putting into it, going to give me a far better return.
I'd love to see that. I'll after this, I'll have a look at that. But that really speaks to what Don't Waste Buildings is about, and our belief, particularly with SMEs, because I think with the major companies, you know, they have the bandwidth and they have the staff and the teams who are very knowledgeable about things like taxation policy and planning policy, and they know all the hoops and everything else. If you're a small developer, though, your bandwidth, your mental bandwidth, is limited. And I think about, because again, before I was doing a call earlier today, and we were talking to someone about the different financial grants and pots of money and that sort of thing that you can utilise to reuse a building, and it's really complicated. I mean, there's stuff there, but you've got to know where it is. Now, when you're running a small business, you're so taken up with the day job of just running it, you don't have the time to sit down and then go through and find out all the different iterations of grants and opportunities and everything else that come along. And it has to be there. It's got to be made available all the time, so that one of the problem with grant funding is, if you've ever tried to go for grant funding,
no. because it just of the time and the mental effort that would need to go into it. That's why I've never touched it.
Exactly. So what you do is you scour the internet looking for the potential grants, and there's links on pages and everything. But there's never a one-stop shop, by the way. That's rule one. Then you open up the grant funding, you read the criteria, and then you think, okay, does that suit me? If it does, brilliant. So you've read all of that. Then you look at the dates, and there are only certain windows. So 9 times out of 10, you'll look at something and go, you know, you've read the 60 pages and realise that, yes, I've got an opportunity. And then you realise it's closed. You know, it closed last Thursday and will reopen in January 2026. So you've got to write it down on a spreadsheet. And so it's really time consuming. And in the end, you just don't have the time to do that. So if we're to drive the economy, you need to make things available so that everybody is able to sort of pick up and get going. If they see an opportunity, they need to have all the ducks in a row to say, I can make this happen. And that's why we talk about the clarity, which is so important.
Definitely. I love that, and I love this building. Sorry, I love the company that you've set up, and the way that it's specifically addressing the buildings that already exist. Because I think that the goal that the current government has here in the UK to build or have a significant amount of housing available, because there's a housing shortage, I think that looking in that space is going to be a lot better than it is trying to build on greenfield sites. And I think also we're going to get all of the benefits from the construction industry or from the built environment by looking at that existing stock, as opposed to just focusing lots of time, effort and metrics on this new build space.
Yes. And I mean, you're more of an expert in construction than I am, and you know the difference. If you've got a team on new build versus on retrofit, they're different skill sets. But right across the country, if we were retraining people on retrofit, first of all, we've got some of the best people around who are already super skilled on it. But it's an opportunity for right across the country. There's also an issue, I think, in smaller places versus the large cities. So there's a really important point around the different sizes of cities and towns across the UK in relation to investment. So if you take the very large cities, generally they attract institutional investors. So all the people, all the trade shows and everything else where you go and try and get overseas investors and pension funds and everyone else, they will go to those big centres. However, the smaller towns don't attract that sort of institutional investment for a range of reasons, and mainly it's about size and capacity and that sort of thing, and just the nature of the beast. But the thing that smaller towns have is they have local wealth. They have people who've made money and who understand the needs of their local communities. So we should be trying to unlock those people so that they can invest in their local towns. And a good example of that is Folkestone. And I haven't been there for a while, but I've sort of been watching this from afar. And, the Dehaan family who owned Saga, they have invested huge amounts of money into Folkestone. And apparently it's just amazing, and I'm desperate to go down and have a look. But, really transformative on a coastal town that no one else was interested in. But because they're local, they were able to invest. Now, we need to unlock people like that all over the country who know their local places, love it, want to invest, but make it easier for them to invest. And I think that's part of Don't Waste Buildings as well, trying to find ways of unlocking that money. It's not all about pension funds, even though they're really important, but it's finding ways to sort of level up all of these other places through very practical means that are there already.
I love that idea, because that investment coming from that local person is going to stay in that area and have more of an impact than a pension fund that is made up of people that aren't from that area, because of the emotion that's attached to it. If you think about the most money that you generally spend, it's based on generally an emotion that's driving it. And normally there are children. We spend loads of money on our children.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's a good thing, right? And I think that when we look at that person that's investing in their local area, then that emotion is going to keep them connected to that area because it means something to them. And that's where the value of money really comes alive, is where you're doing something that has a meaning to you.
Yes, yes.
And I don't mean that you're invested on an emotion as in like it's a whim and it's just that, you're emotionally unstable. I'm saying that these emotions carry meaning with them, and that's what adds that thing which is called value.
Yes.
But you're not going to get that value from a pension fund.
Well, that's right. And you've raised a really important point, which is what is the value of passion to drive a project forward and make something happen versus, sort of just the cold hard cash. And I think that's a really important point. And if we could tap into that, because I think most people are intensely patriotic about their country and also their local area and want to see it work. So if we just need to find ways of unlocking that and making it simple. And when we talk about simple policy, we use the example all the time with Don't Waste Buildings of the plastic bag tax. So years ago, 10 years ago, it may be shocking for younger listeners, but every time you went shopping, you got a plastic bag. And if you were doing the weekly shop, you got 10 of them. So we all had just rooms filled with plastic bags. And of course, this was madness. And there were some amazing people who campaigned on getting it changed. And the government brought in a 5p charge on plastic bags. And I have never seen anything work so effectively, so quickly. Almost overnight, the use of plastic bags dropped dramatically. And I, constantly look at people going in and out of supermarkets, and everybody, doesn't matter what shape or size, age, race, whatever, everyone's carrying their plastic bag. And because we know we're doing the right thing. And if you forget your plastic bag, we've all felt it, haven't we? We feel that real, oh my God, and you're all apologetic and say, I'm not a bad person, but please, can I have another one? And what an amazing thing it's done. However, we have someone carrying their plastic bag into a supermarket, while around the corner we're knocking down a building. And so you've got to question how many plastic bags are in a building that we're not even giving second thought to on knocking down. And I've asked our sort of our scientific engineering brains in the community to come up with, you know, a graphic of how many plastic bags are in a building, but no one's been able to calculate the exact amount yet. But it's a lot, and I think you get the point.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I remember those days. It just takes me back, just that story took me back to when I used to work at Tesco. I was on the tills, and I used to throw plastic bags at whoever was packing their shopping, just like you know,
confetti.
It was going out, just like confetti. Just here you go, have all this, have more. But the other thing with that is the quality of the plastic bag improved because they were intended to be reused.
Yes.
But when I was on the till at Tesco, they weren't intended to be reused because they would break all the time, and no one really bothered. They'd break, and she said, just throw it away, don't worry about it, because there's more where that came from.
Yes, but look how wonderful that human behaviour has changed so quickly, so it can be done. And the message around don't waste buildings is so multi-layered that it's not all about the climate. It's about being able to talk to anybody and say, do you like waste? Now, nobody does. It doesn't matter where you are politically. If you say to someone, I want to throw away the leftovers, you know, people sort of get twitchy about that. So the message, I think, is absolutely clear, and everyone understands that. So we need to find a way of unlocking things. Now, I just need to correct you on one thing. We're not a company. We're a sort of collective group, and we don't even have a formal structure. Lots of people have been asking us to register as a charity and things like that. So we may look at that. But we like the fact that there is no money changes hands. Everything we do is, we do it for free. Lots of people volunteer their buildings and time and everything else. And that has a knock-on that it's a real community spirit. So we're not beholden to anyone. So if someone's, you know, gives you sponsorship, sometimes you've got to do the right thing and say the right thing. We're not in anyone's pocket, right. Which means we attract everyone, which is very liberating.
So how can someone get involved? Someone listening to this, they think, you know, I love this concept. What can I do? How can I get involved?
Well, interestingly, we had someone do that from Australia. I didn't know them, but they contacted us through the website, and now they've set up a chapter in Australia. Now, we didn't set out to change Australian policy and VAT rules, which they don't have, but the concept has travelled. We've had people from Canada call. We now have chapter leads in different parts of the country because we can't possibly know, you know, all the detailed stuff happening in each area. So contact us via the website. We've got a LinkedIn group you can join, and we post relevant information, and people chat about what's going on in their area and all of that sort of thing. We're doing a tour down to Bristol on Friday, where we're going to see 6 buildings, I think it is, where we have a team on tour today in Coventry. We're going to Portsmouth. We've been up to Letchworth Garden City. We've been to Birmingham. We're doing Manchester. We've had online conversations with people in Orkney. Would you believe? Right. Orkney has a housing crisis. They have a university up there, and lots of people want to live in Orkney, and they don't have enough buildings. So how do they reuse them? So I find it one of the most fun things I do, because it's quite uplifting, because everyone is really positive. They want to make a change. So short answer, get in touch via the website. There's a little sort of joining info button, and we're pretty good at coming back straight away.
Good. Leanne, I've loved having you speak on the podcast. Your wisdom, your perspective, your passion, absolutely, I've loved it. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching to the end. I think that you'll like this, but before you do that, just make sure that you've commented and liked below, and also that you subscribed.